Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course this is my co-host.
My name is Chris Huddleston.
And today we are both very excited to be talking to you about, what year was this movie, Chris?
1999.
The 1999 film Boondock Saints.
On the streets of Boston.
This was no gangland assassination. It was way too sloppy. Something went wrong here.
An FBI agent is on a case.
All the low-lifes in the quiet city of Boston start dropping dead, and you think it's unrelated.
They're all bad guys. Now they're all dead bad guys.
The victims are the mob.
What we have here, gentlemen, is the beginning of the first international mob war.
And the hitmen think they're on a mission from God.
Anybody you think is evil, don't you think that's a little weird, a little psycho?
Sort of like 7-Eleven. We're not always doing business, but we're always open.
That is nicely put.
There was 2 shooters. Bang, freaking tastic.
This guy's very sharp. If he hasn't figured us out yet, he will.
All we know is what we found out from the neighbors, and the general consensus is they're angels.
Hey, man.
In a place where the violent have the power.
Destroy all that which is evil, so that which is good may flourish.
One lawman doesn't know whether to catch the killers.
I believe what they do is necessary.
Or join them.
All the things I wish I could do, these guys are doing.
With every breath, we shall hunt them down. Each day, we will spill their blood.
There was a firefight!
Saints.
Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do. So this one was written and directed by Troy Duffy. It stars Sean Patrick Flanery, Norman Reedus, Willem Dafoe, and others. And the synopsis from IMDb, short but sweet: 2 Irish Catholic brothers become vigilantes and wipe out Boston's criminal underworld in the name of God. So
That is short and sweet.
Yeah, but that's pretty much the story. I mean, for the most part, there's not a whole lot more to it. So despite this being, a movie from 1999 and a cult classic and all that kind of stuff, neither, however you say it, of us had watched this before. So
correct. It's
a new one to both of us. So what were your thoughts?
Well, this was the first film directed by Troy Duckfeet. Is that correct?
Well, we'll get into that.
Duckfeet. Yeah,
I think that's a major. I think the backstory is almost more interesting than the movie.
Yes. So, what did I think? I thought it was a Tarantino wannabe. Like Reservoir Dogs is so very much the mold in which this movie is formed, and I think that it is successful at times in creating some exciting action sequences. And I think it succeeds in feeling, gritty and edgy, exciting, right? But I also think it fails about half of the time when it really feels like it's trying to be something, and you can sort of feel the writing. And just to kind of cut to the marrow of it, what turned me off about this movie, and I would be interesting to go back in time and talk to myself if I could see it when it came out versus now in 2023. But what kind of turned me off about this film watching it now was there's a kind of an undercurrent of homophobia in there that I can almost imagine the filmmakers being like, "Oh, you didn't understand it," right? I can almost imagine an immediate defensive, "Well, you just didn't get it, that's what I was going for." But I think that's false. I think if that's what you were going for, it was clumsy and you failed. The detective character is gay, but apparently is himself. I don't know. We can get more into this, but has some problematic things. That whole character is problematic in that regard, and it's Willem Dafoe. So it's not like you can write it off on, an actor that doesn't know what they're doing with the part. It's weird. And you go, oh,
Very
well, it's
weird.
Boston, it's the crime world. I'm like, yeah, I understand, but it's just you just keep hitting that anvil with the hammer again and again and again, and I'm just like, it's not funny. And then at the end, there's these sort of interviews with people on the street, and the movie is super pro-vigilante. Like, these two are vigilantes, and they dress it up in all of this Catholic pageantry to sort of be like, no, this is what God wants. But the movie doesn't leave it at, that's what these two guys are telling themselves. The movie seems, in its last word, to be like, these characters are right, and, a significant portion of the general population agrees with them, right? And I thought it was kind of like, wow, that's weird. I mean, that's a really strong choice, and I don't mean strong like positive strong, but a really bold, heavy-handed choice to make at the end. When I think that's quite a questionable stance to take. Mm-hmm. I mean, the film Joker got a lot of pushback for like glorifying incel and vigilante, whatever. But I did not feel, having watched that movie, that the film promoted that, right? That the film was like, this is what everybody should do. This guy is correct, right? This guy's the leader we've all been waiting for. I felt that movie was a portrait of somebody with serious mental illness, and it was sort of like an answer to the question, like Nolan did with the Batman films. How could we do an origin story for this comic book character and make it feel as close to plausible in the quote-unquote real world as we could? Like, can we do that? And that's what the movie felt like to me, and I thought it was probably right that the people that would jump in behind a disruptor like the character depicted by Joaquin Phoenix in that film would be, populist, mob mentality, burn it all down, yahoos that felt disaffected, this sort of January 6th crowd that's like, well, we need to take matters in our own hands and cause some public violence here. And so it was interesting seeing this film and having it sort of end with like, yeah, this is the ticket. No, I don't think it is the ticket, guys. I think it's a problem.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Well, yeah, so I think it's interesting, and we had talked a little bit, just kind of briefly texted, before recording, and you talked about the homophobia aspect, which is definitely there. And I read, doing a little bit of reading about it today, there was a quote that I found, and I don't want to misattribute to, but it was from one of the two leads, I believe, at the time. And it's kind of interesting because we're now 25 years out or whatever from this. And at that time, they were saying, this is a pushback on all the political correctness. So they were saying this 25 years ago. So, and the movie knows that even some of this stuff is not like they have this friend called Rocco, who's also called the funny man, who I felt was one of the worst characters in the thing. I thought he was pretty bad. But there's a part where he is telling a joke to these mob bosses, and they, it's like a Hispanic guy, a white guy, and a black guy, and they keep correcting him and say, and they're saying the N-word, and he doesn't want to say it. But they're like, no, say it, and then finally he does. So the movie knows, these aren't really, 25 years ago, they were just like, you're not supposed to say this, So, that was,
So what's the movie is the only microphone, right? The audience doesn't get What's the argument you're trying to win there? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're gleefully insisting that we get this in there because screw political correctness, but what's your mission here? We should all be using offensive slurs like that. There's no such thing as a bad word. They also cast Ron Jeremy as one of the characters in that scene.
Yeah, when when you see Ron Jeremy, you're like, okay, I know what kind of movie this is. You put Ron Jeremy in it because again, that's politically incorrect. But this stuff started. I can remember I don't even remember what the class was that I took, but I can remember being in college in the mid '90s and taking a class, and the professor, who was a woman, was talking about, I think it might have been like a journalism class or something that I took like for an elective. I don't remember exactly what it was. English class or something like that. But she was talking about politically, using proper terms in writing, back in the 90s. And, that was when this stuff really started, this kind of pushback of, you can't tell me what to say, So that's part of what they were going for with this. Also, I think to me, and maybe it's just because he's the best actor in it, but I thought Willem Dafoe's character was by far the most interesting. It's as you said, a weird character. And they have a chance. So there is, like you said, there is continuously throughout this, just, everybody's throwing out, gay slurs and, everybody's, cocksucker is, one of the things. They just, everybody's that, and I felt for a while that maybe because there's nothing said about Willem Dafoe being gay, but there's a scene where he's in bed, like in a hotel with another man. And you're like, okay, so I kind of felt like maybe they were going to, even amidst all of these slurs and everything, that maybe they were going to present a positive portrayal of like, it's just, this guy just happens to be gay. But by the end of the movie, they make him, because they have him dressed as a woman, and that
was crazy.
Yeah. For what reason, I don't know exactly. But he's by far, it's just such a kind of an over the top performance. And I thought one thing that to almost do the kind of Tarantino spin, instead of having things out of order in timeline, which was Pulp Fiction, the brothers go and kill somebody, and right before they kill them, then they cut to, Willem Dafoe's this FBI agent, and him with these bumbling cops, and him laying out what happened, and then they show what actually happened. And towards the end of the movie, I thought they did a cool thing where they have one of the last set pieces, I guess, is him there, and then they show them going into the scene with him. And, he's sort of narrating what happened, but also looking at them and everything. I thought that was well done, And this is not a great movie, but like I said, where I think the backstory is almost more interesting than what the movie is itself, and there's a documentary about this. But this Troy Duffy was just a guy. He was a bartender and a bouncer, and he decided to write a script. He'd never written a script before, didn't go to film school, didn't have any experience or anything like that. Wrote a script. He said that there were, I guess across the hall in his apartment, they were selling drugs constantly, and he got sick of these drug dealers being there. So this was, I guess, sort of his, vigilante fantasy or whatever. And so he writes a script, gets it to an agent, and then there's sort of a mini bidding war over this, and he sells the script, and they have him direct it. So
flabbergasting.
I think from that level, when you just look at it as a guy who had no experience, it's not like it's it just looks like a 90s kind of lowish budget film, but it's not, I mean, there are certainly people who went on to be much better filmmakers than this guy, who their early films were a lot worse than this.
That's true.
So it's impressive from that standpoint, but it was in this weird era where all the studios, for whatever reason, were trying to make their own Pulp Fiction, and by the time these movies were being made, Quentin Tarantino had moved beyond Pulp Fiction. I don't mean in terms of that the films were better. I mean, I think some of the films that he did are better than Pulp Fiction, but he just wasn't doing that kind of thing anymore. And to me, at that time, the wrong lessons were learned. It seemed like so many of them, they just focused on the violence. And, this movie, some of the copycats are more graphic than this. It's pretty graphic.
Yeah.
But, I think the guy just happened to be in the right place at the right time, that this was a script that was Tarantino-esque, and I suppose they were just buying anything they could find that, somewhat resembled that.
Yeah.
One thing that surprised me, so you've got Neil Patrick Harris, not Neil Patrick Harris.
No.
What's the guy's name? Sean Patrick Flanery, who one of those three name guys. I felt neither one of them are spectacular. But considering that Norman Reedus has kind of gone on to be the bigger star because of The Walking Dead, he's really bad in this.
Yeah.
Sean Patrick Flanery is not, getting any Oscar nominations, and he's doing this kind of, Lucky Charms Irish accent. But I thought he was a lot better than Norman Reedus. I mean, what did you think about that?
But they all speak. They speak like 8 languages, right? One of my favorite scenes is they're sitting there
and they never explain.
No,
because there's.
They just said our mom wanted us to learn all these languages, right? But the detective character puts his finger right on it. He's like, "What are you guys doing working in a meat packing plant or whatever?"
Yeah, meat packing place.
And it's never answered. They kind of look at each other, and I'm just like, "No, that's the question. Why you've these two working class guys who are, according to this film, are geniuses, basically."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a scene in which they talk to each other. They're sort of showing off, and they're talking to each other in this sort of kaleidoscope of all the different languages they know. I mean, it's not a well-written scene, but I like it that the detective says, "What's your deal? Like, what is it with you two?" And we don't get an answer to that. I'm like, I think it would be interesting if the script actually answered that.
And I don't know if the script, if he felt like that was just that made it more mysterious, but I really felt like there's something, that you could do there.
They don't live a particularly holy life. I mean, they're constantly doing the pageantry. They've got rosary beads and they put coins in the eyes, some archaic Catholic stuff, but they don't live particularly Catholic lives. I mean, they're drinking, fighting, swearing, rough and tumble lads that decide, what we need to do is we need to start murdering. I mean, it's the one commandment that's actually illegal, thou shalt not kill, and they're just like, they find some obscure quote in the Bible that sort of justifies it, and they go on a killing spree and recruit other people.
Well, and also it's I like the synopsis that I read said that they, it's like they're on a mission from God or whatever. And the only time that we are given any indication of that is they're questioned at the police department, and then they says, well, you're free to go. And they said, well, can we just stay? And they're like, well, there's an extra cell, you can sleep in. And it's raining, and there's raining dripping through the ceiling of the cell. And I don't know, I think maybe there's lightning and thunder. And they bolt up out of bed, and you're like, okay, that's the indication that they're on a mission from God. But there's never anything else that really indicates that. And so from that point forward, I was thinking, okay, are they able to, just go in and murder these people and live because now they're supernatural? But the movie never says that,
It's kind of all over the place in that regard.
Because they get shot and bleed,
It's the whole movie's an excuse to have shoot up scenes and say forbidden words. I mean, a cat gets accidentally shot at one point, and the one thing that I do think is kind of interesting is there's this trajectory of them. They start off killing truly bad people. Like they kill mob bosses and, criminals, flagrant, violent criminals that the law hasn't been able to touch for one reason or another. Then they get this funny guy, Chucklehead, on board. And they're in a strip club or a peep show booth or something where they're going to go kill some unknown bad guy. And this Chucklehead kills whoever's in the other booths, too. And that's where it crosses a line from, oh, we're on a sacred mission to, holy justice, take out the bad guys, to, well, they were in the other, his funny guys like, well, they probably bad guys too. And I did like that they kept that scene in there because it points up how sloppy this concept of vigilante justice is, right? I mean, who gets to decide who deserves death? And not that the legal system is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I did like that the movie included that once you get a third person involved, and that person is sort of an idiot, and suddenly you're outside the lines of these rules you created for yourself, right? Your code gets broken very quickly.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it left a taste in my mouth that felt like it was sort of a gratuitous thing more than it was an impressive accomplishment, even though it was a fairly impressive accomplishment considering a number of factors. Like it really was. But I just think that the worst of it is bad enough to be sort of, to kind of kill my, like I wouldn't want to watch it again. There's nothing in here that I would be like, oh yeah, we should check that out again. I'm like, no, I've seen it.
Yeah.
And there's a sequel, and I'm like, no thanks. Right.
And there's rumored that, so again, to give you an idea how this guy's career went, he directed this, he wrote and directed the second one, he directed some TV show that I've never heard of before. That's his filmography. That's the entire thing. And he's rumored to be doing 3, which Sean Patrick Flanery is attached to, but will they be able to get Norman Reedus? Who knows, But a little bit more well, let me say this. Yeah, let me say this. Another thing where I liked this a little bit more than what I expected to like it, because even though it has times where it's pretty self-serious, I thought it's played for laughs. That's not that the laughs are particularly funny, but I thought this was going to be deadly serious, and I thought it was going to be, and they are at least, they're these guys going around killing people, but they're at least somewhat likable, to a degree, and they aren't doing the my pet peeve, the the tough guy voice. You know, they're not going around talking like this, and you know, they're just kind of goofy and almost bumbling.
No, they're going around talking like this. Oh, what are you doing, brother? Okay.
Accents. But they're just sort of, for vigilantes, they're kind of happy-go-lucky, you know.
Yeah.
And if this had just been an entire thing of them being very serious and, you know, trying to be, even though it is kind of presented like they're badasses, their persona is not badass. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
And I appreciated that was a little bit, my expectation was that this would be even worse in that way than what. So the fact that it was, I don't know that lighthearted is the term, but I was just glad that it wasn't super, super serious, because, you know, this is one of these things where, you know, and I'd always been aware of this movie. I don't know, I can't remember having like friends who were way into this, but this was one of these movies at the time where, you know, guys who saw this in high school or college, this like became their identity, you know, some of them, where they would watch this, you know, people who would get the tattoos and all that kind of stuff, you know. And so hard
for me to imagine, but
I'm glad I missed but it so, and another background thing, it basically didn't get it only played in 5 theaters because this was right around the time of, again, we kind of come full circle, so we have the political correctness thing and everything. And also, this movie, they kind of shelved it because of Columbine. It was around the time of Columbine, and they didn't. And, you know, so look where we are. I mean, I'm not meaning to laugh, but it's just like Columbine was such a huge thing, and people were so shocked. And it's like, how often do we have basically a Columbine now? You know,
daily it feels like.
Yeah, and so it's you know, that's not stopping movies from being released now, but so it only played in 5 theaters, so it didn't make any money, but it made $50 million on home video. So you know, so that's a big success, you know, in those terms. But so yeah,
I guess it not really knowing anything about it, being aware of it and being aware that it was an indie darling and that it had made a splash, but I didn't know any of the backstory. I really didn't. I was a clean slate, and I think
I knew some of the backstory. I had no idea that they were Irish. I thought they were going to be like Irish American, but I had no idea they were actually going to be Irish in it. And you know, other than that, I'd just seen, you know,
but again, why
stills online of them pointing the guns, you know,
right? Why? There's nothing that's sort of like, oh, they came out of Northern Ireland or something, and their mom was involved in the troubles. You know, there's nothing. They're just like, oh, they're in Boston, so they're Irish. And you're like, well, do they do fantastic Irish accents? Oh, they don't? Just watch. So drop it. They don't have to be Irish. You know, they're Irish Catholic. Sure, their mom was Irish. They grew up here. Sure, and why are they be talking like this? Because it's stupid. And there's a lot of this movie that is style that's just not moored. Like the choice of picking Ron Jeremy. You anybody can play a heavy in the Italian Mob. No, we got to get Ron Jeremy because he's particularly loathsome, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it makes sense to me that the person who wrote this was a bartender, right? And a bouncer, and was like, oh, I'm going to write me a script over here, and it's going to be true, all the truths.
Well, and like in the very opening scene, you know, they're at Mass because they go to Mass every morning or whatever, and they walk out, and they both, you know, they dress the same. They wear these big, you know, like pea coats and dress all in black and everything. And as soon as they walk out, they both light up their cigarettes because smoking is cool, right? I mean, it was literally just like, yeah, smoking's cool, so we're gonna have that, and everybody's gonna smoke, you know. In this, it was a time period when people still smoked in movies, but it's just like, yeah, they're gonna smoke because it's cool, because it looks cool, you know.
Right.
A lot of
in the
things
matching
like,
duster jackets, because that's what people wear in Boston, is ankle length leather dusters. Right, and you're not supposed to think about it. You're supposed to be like, oh, these badasses.
they kill these first Russian guys, and it was really funny how quickly the police are just like, it was self-defense. You're free to go. Like after like 5 minutes, there's no trial or anything. It's like, yeah, you're free to go. And now they're giving them coffee and stuff, and now they're heroes and everything. So now they're going to do more missions, and you are, somewhat known in the city. And I was thinking, okay, change your look up, color your hair, wear different clothes now. Nope, they're going to look at, that's going to be their look for the entirety of the film. I guess it's not that the film isn't thinking too much about those things, because it's like, we look cool. So, yeah.
Yep. So, I mean, I guess in terms of recommending it, I don't. And generally, I'm like, meh. We're far enough away from the mythology of it or whatever, the buzz of it, that I think it's like, well, yeah, interesting backstory. An outsider wrote a script. There was a bidding war. They tapped him to direct it. That's insane to me. That is insane.
Now, this was, I'm sure that this was just a Wikipedia synopsis, so I'm sure there was more in there that I can't imagine. You see Sylvester Stallone's story with Rocky, and it's like he really, he wrote the script, and then he had to fight, like hell to beat, because they didn't want to let. And the Wikipedia just makes it sound like, you wrote the script, you can direct too.
Right.
So I can't imagine that there weren't some more steps to it than that, but still, for this guy with no, and Sylvester Stallone had acted in films before Rocky, so it wasn't like he had. I mean, they weren't great films, but it wasn't like he had zero experience. It sounds like this guy he was just a guy,
right,
and
who
just
had
got
seen
lucky,
movies. Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of that what makes it. And it sounds like you also read some stuff that people didn't get along with him on the set and things. So it sounds like maybe he's not that great of a guy. But this is what everybody who moves to Hollywood is trying to do,
Right.
It's just like, hey, I wrote a script, or somebody saw me in a coffee shop and was like, hey, you should be in our movie, And but the thing is, so I'm just looking at Rotten Tomatoes here to see. On IMDb, it's a 7.7.
Really?
Which is pretty high. Yeah. Let's see what it is on Boondock Saints. This is Rotten Tomatoes. Okay. It's a 27 from critics, but a 91 from audience with more than 250,000 ratings.
Wow, I guess it found its audience.
So
I agree with
Rotten
the critics.
Tomatoes says a Rotten Tomatoes says a juvenile, ugly movie that represents the worst tendencies of directors channeling Tarantino, which I think that's pretty apt. Yeah,
Here. I would agree.
I would
with that.
not recommend it. I would not recommend it either. I mean, it's fine I had always wanted to see it, just because it just been one of those that kind of slipped by me in the 90s, and I knew it was a cult.
Yeah. I don't regret having seen it. Now I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I'd always wanted to watch it, but it's not. I get, like you said, I don't know what the 99 version of me would have thought, but I wasn't really into these Tarantino clones at the time, so I can't imagine that I would have been too into this. So yeah,
it took me a little while to warm up on the Tarantino classics.
Honestly, I would say I did not like. I've never gone back and watched Reservoir Dogs. I did not like Reservoir Dogs, and on the first viewing, I did not like. I didn't like Pulp Fiction originally, and I went back and watched it years later and was like, "Oh, this," because I loved the Kill Bill movies. That was kind of when I really was like, "Oh yeah, I think I'm into Tarantino." And then I went back later and watched. Pulp Fiction but at the time I was just kind of like, this is kind of the violence bothered me, and just I didn't really think.
But you liked Kill Bill?
I know that doesn't make sense. Yeah.
I mean, to me,
But
I liked Pulp Fiction, but I didn't like the Kill Bill movies, and the Reservoir Dogs I didn't particularly like, but I recognized it as a kind of a seminal thing. You know, I'm like, wow, that is a gut punch, that movie, you know? And I recognized the surety of his hand, you know? But the Kill Bills to me just felt like, it was style, and I didn't see any substance in it. It's just, and to make two of them, you know, you have so much of this. It's the same scene. It's just these bloody fight sequences. It's a revenge story. And you need 2 movies to do that. You could have made 1 hour-and-a-half movie of all the best of this, and you would have told the same story, right? So it just felt super indulgent to me, and I haven't gone back and rewatched it. But I think Tarantino has really grown as a filmmaker. I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a remarkable film.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's great. And at the time I know we've talked about this before. I know on other episodes that I'm hypocritical with this, but I can remember watching Pulp Fiction with some friends. So this would have been in college because that was the 90s. And just it's a lot of times that I think tying humor and really serious violence together kind of bothers me, you know. And I can remember my friends just thinking like Pulp Fiction was hilarious, and I was just like, I don't know, like somebody gets shot in the head and their brains explode all over the place. Is that funny? I don't, you know. But
well, to me, the title ties it. The title is the whole point. Is that this is it's homage. I think it's a well-balanced mixtape of homage to a bunch of different stuff. I loved the way he wove the different storylines together, which I think has become very pat now. But that felt electrifying to me at the time. And it was very pulp, right? It was very exploitative and, you know, shocks and thrills and titillation and the whole movie was that, but I saw an artistry to the way that he wove those threads together that I thought was really something new. I hadn't quite seen anything like that before, I thought.
Right. And like I say with this, and you know, I've gone on to appreciate Pulp Fiction, and I love Jackie Brown. I think I like Jackie Brown more than Pulp. Jackie Brown is probably his most, because that's a movie nobody ever talks about. You know, that's a great movie. But like with this Boondock Saints, it's interesting that he kind of created his own genre, which was then copied, and then he had moved on to. It wasn't like he just kept making Pulp Fiction over and over. Right. You know. So.
Right, but you get these imitators that think it's a kind of like it's a worldview, like it's some sort of a manifesto, like it's right, and what they're emulating is a bunch of surface style without, I think, either they can't replicate it or they fail to grasp what's underneath, what's the underpinning of Tarantino stuff, right? And I think it's as much a love. Each of his movies is kind of a love letter to Hollywood in different ways. They're all so full of love for the various things that they emulate or recreate or steal from, or right. I mean, so much of what he does, I think, is homage. Sure. And at its best, he sort of establishes that world and reinvents it in his own way. And his kind of gonzo filmmaking with Django Unchained, or what's the Inglourious Bastards, where he rewrites history. Like it's a World War II film, spoiler alert, in which they kill Hitler.
Yeah, right.
You know, you get to the end of it, you go, oh, wow. Like he's just making the movie that he wished. Right? It's not a historical piece at all. I I'm like, it's my movie. I'm going to do what I want. And give us a satisfying ending, to World War II.
Oh, sure. And Tarantino, obviously the guy's a great filmmaker and, has a pretty much encyclopedic knowledge of film. And, he takes things from different movies and pays his homage to them and everything. Whereas with this, and Quentin Tarantino, I'm sure growing up was like, if I did this, this is what I would do. And this movie that we talked about tonight, The Boondock Saints, was basically a guy, I'm presuming, being just like, I could make a movie. How hard could it be? You know? And he did it. It worked out. The guy did it. And you can really see that it seems that he thinks he's doing this Tarantino-esque dialogue, and it's just a lot of people shouting at each other. There's a lot of scenes of the Rocco guy and them, and they're just screaming, and you can't understand what they're saying, and it's not, and they're just dropping F-bombs, but they're not saying anything. There's not, what line, I'm sure people do who love this movie, but like what lines would you quote from this film? Whereas look at all the great lines in Quentin Tarantino films that you can quote, because he writes really good dialogue. He's in love with his own dialogue, but he writes, it's good.
But that you put your finger right on it. And it's like, just because Tarantino's dialogue is frequently laced with offensive language, a certain observer might think it's lacing the dialogue with offensive language that makes it good. Mm-hmm. And no, it's terrific dialogue. Tarantino just has a little bit of that chip on his shoulder. I think less so as he's aged and done more of it. Certainly early on, that sort of defiance of the times, like, it's art. I'm gonna paint with profanity, and and I'm going to put it in the mouths of white characters and black characters, and try and create this on-screen kind of community. I remember people being, very upset, and who's allowed to say the N-word, and I think his argument was like, censorship sucks, and I'm an artist, and there was a defiance to it. I think clearly, whether or not it was like some crusade or a mission, I don't know that I'm qualified to speak to, but in this film, it feels like, we'll just let everybody talk a blue streak, and that will be great because that's what Tarantino does. Well, no, that's not what Tarantino does. Tarantino writes really dynamic dialogue.
And, it didn't even occur to me until just now, you saying this, the part that we talked about where the guy is telling the racist joke and it has the N-word in it. I bet they just put that in there just because they're like, oh, yeah, Tarantino uses the N-word in his movies, and that makes it edgy, And they didn't understand that just saying the N-word doesn't make it edgy. It just makes it seem cheap and dumb.
And offensive. I mean, you can be anti-political correctness for whatever reason, but you can't argue that nothing is offensive, right? I mean, that right. Can't be one and the same argument. You can say, well, I'm a comedian. I'm allowed to say whatever I want. I heard a comedian recently be like, you can. I think it was Mark Maron was like, you can. You can say whatever you want. That's the beauty of this country. There's probably going to be some consequences depending on what you say, but nobody is preventing you from saying it, right?
This whole idea that there's a big difference between not being able to say whatever you want and people wanting to listen to what you have to say, that people don't seem to understand.
Right.
You can say whatever you want.
Sure.
And, but that doesn't mean people have to listen to it or like it.
Right.
If you go into a bar and you start, if I go to Massachusetts and I go into a bar and I just start saying how everybody in Massachusetts sucks and is an idiot, and I have the right to say that. I mean, I'm not going to get arrested for saying people in Massachusetts. I don't like people who live in Massachusetts, but probably going to be people in the bar who are going to be not happy with me saying that.
They might say some things back. You might be asked to leave the bar.
They might say some things back. You might be, but that's not censorship.
No.
I
was listening to a protester on a podcast the other day talk about in Florida and this kind of anti-woke thing that's happening in America and Ron DeSantis. And she said something really interesting. She says, I have confidence that, my ideas will stand up to rigorous debate. Like she says, I believe what I believe because I think it holds water and it's true. And I'm prepared to argue those points. And I wish we would. I wish we would have this conversation that a lot of the country just seems to be trying to ban. They're passing laws forbidding you from saying certain things and from, doing, so whether it's drag queens in libraries or, right? I mean, that's not America, right? You can't just pass a law that says you can't say this anymore. That's crazy. And yet, but that's happening all around the country.
And trying to close down libraries,
right?
Defund libraries and close down libraries. There was some story recently, and it was some small town somewhere, and they were, there was like a push to defund the library or close down the library or whatever. And people were speaking there, and there was one woman, and she said, "Do we really want to be known as the town who closed our libraries?
Right?
That we don't have libraries because." Somebody was offended. I was reading this week. They did the movie of is it Judy Blume, Margaret? God,
is it
me, Margaret?
Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret.
Oh, you there, God? Yeah, it's me, Margaret. I couldn't think of the title, and I can remember that I went to. So we went to public school together from the 7th grade on, but I went to a Catholic school run by nuns. And we had that book in our school library. I can remember explicitly it being there in this, and I don't ever remember any controversy about it or anything. But I was reading Judy Blume saying that it's a commonly banned book. And she said when it was written in the 70s, it was banned from the library of the school that her kids went to. The public school that they went to did not allow it in there. And she said, and they're still trying to ban it today, like 50 years later or whatever. It's just insane. I
haven't read it recently, but I have read it. And I remember as a kid feeling like there were parts of it that did feel quite radical to me, like quite honest in shocking ways, and then as a kid, I was like, oh, wow, like, someone wrote that and is getting away with it, and I'm allowed to read it and, think about it and have feelings about it. Like Judy Blume really seemed to be able to get inside the mind of a child in authentic feeling ways and write about things everybody, but kids too, think about and wrestle with. And, I think that's... scary for some people. That's very uncomfortable for some people. But I don't think the answer is to block it out. I think the answer is to talk about it, work on it. Why is it uncomfortable? Let's use it.
And the positive thing today is when we were kids, there were only physical books.
Right.
And, the idea of banning physical books is probably meaningless to kids because it's just like, I'll just read it on my iPad or whatever. Now they have tried to take away the digital access to libraries for kids too, so they wouldn't be able to, but there's still, even if they do that, there's PDFs of books and, that you can that the kids are going to be able to read it if they really want to.
I'm sorry that this has turned
into
a very special episode of Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
We did get into a very special
and that I always get rolling on politics, but I just, zooming out for 1 second, the last thing I want to say about it is it just seems like a dead end, right? So let's bury our heads in the sand and everything's going to get better? Like, no, that's not a way forward. Like, we all are going to need to up our game and come together to get through the things climate crisis, there's global things happening that we need to work on solutions together, right? And so if we're just like la la la, it's like, well, that's not. You're not going to get there doing that.
It's weird to think of. On the one hand, you look at the 90s or you look at the 80s, and people would. And I talked to when we were in Massachusetts. Or when I was in Massachusetts visiting you. I don't know if I want to say his name or not, but a good mutual friend I was talking to about the whole gay slur thing. And I said, when we were in the 80s, when we were kids in the 80s, the worst thing that a boy could say to another boy is you're gay. And I said, I hope that I didn't play into that too much, and that, there are, there are people that we grew up with who they turned out to be gay. We didn't know when we were kids because nobody said anything. But I hope that I didn't ever do anything to make them feel, badly or anything like that. But on the one hand, you have that where it was like, okay, we had these gay slurs and it wasn't, and also there was one scene in this movie where they said retarded also, which is not something that, we say these days. But on the other hand, it's crazy to think that we weren't banning books in the 80s, I don't remember that, they tried to ban music, rock music and all that, but it's weird that in some ways there was more. I brought up this before. I think that in the 7th grade we went to see Inherit the Wind about was it the Scopes monkey trial or Snopes monkey trial, which is the science is right, and there was never any discussion in our little town in West Virginia that I recall that the teachers were like, now the creationists say this and the science people say this. It's up to you. It was just science is right. The creationists are wrong. Right. That was the message that we were given, which is a more progressive message than what we would probably have today. And when we were kids, if somebody had said, okay, when you're 50, there will be major, a guy who's probably going to run for president trying to ban books, I would have been like, oh, come on. That's not, at 2023, they're going to be banning books and trying to close. No, that won't,
2023 feels like, a Fahrenheit 451 number. 2023 feels like a date that somebody in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it feels like Big Brother. Well, of course, that was 1984, but it feels like a number somebody picked. And Blade Runner was 2019, but it's this goofy sounding number that I didn't feel in 2022. But when it turned 2023, I was like, oh, the year is 2023 with flying cars and robot dogs. And you're like, we do have robot dogs. It's like, but it just feels, it feels like the world is upside down, and that in some ways, and that really reminds me of some of this kind of social message, speculative science fiction of earlier decades in the 20th century. They pick a time like, way down the road, in your grandchildren's time, they will be, fascist tendencies in America. And at the time you chuckle, being like, well, that could never happen here. But I understand the point you're trying to make. And here we are. And you're like, oh, my God.
And not to, put too fine a point on it, but in a class in high school, we read Fahrenheit 451 and watched the movie.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that would be allowed in a lot of schools today. I think they would try to ban that,
Crazy town.
Crazy. So, all right. So, we're both thumbs down on the Boondock.
You don't need to see this one.
We're probably not going to watch the sequel.
I mean, it's not going to... you're not... If you're like, but I want to watch it, okay, go watch it. It's certainly not the worst movie we've done.
One big positive, I would say, if you have Amazon Prime, it's on Prime, so you don't have to pay for it. It's on... if you don't have Prime and you don't mind ads, it's on Tubi.
That's how I watched it, yeah.
Oh, you watched it on Tubi?
Yeah, I didn't realize it was on Prime.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I found it on Prime and I was like, hooray, I don't have to pay for this. Because it was definitely better watching it for free than if I'd paid $4 or whatever. So
for next time,
what do we think about for next time? Are we going
Eve of Destruction?
Eve of Destruction. Okay.
That movie is bonkers.
You've seen it?
I think I saw it back when it came out in the 80s.
Okay, I've never seen it. Again, another that it's in that wheelhouse of stuff that I would have watched at that time.
I think if you watch the trailer, I think that's what you're going to get. I don't think you'll watch the movie and be like, wow, the trailer really made it look like a different movie. Nope. Mm-hmm. I think it's an hour and a half of that.
It made me a little bit sad to watch and be like, oh, Gregory Hines. I mean, he was slumming it, in this thing. But, yeah, it looks... and this one looks like it might actually fall into that kind of so bad it's good category instead of just being boring. So I don't know.
What we were texting each other back lines from the trailer after you suggested it to me. And what was the thing it said? Oh, she's a... I think I sent it to you. She's a brilliant machine who's learning to be all woman. This female scientist has made basically a replicant of herself. But it turns out that the robot Eve is also a nuclear bomb. So she's gonna detonate, and she keeps having this tagline being like, "I'm very sensitive." So it's this kind of 80s. Woman in the workplace. Oy, boy, guys, you got to check it out with us, please. Eve of Destruction. Gregory Hines, 1991. It's funny, it's 1991, but it really feels like a 1980.
I would have thought 1985.
Yeah, 6 or six. One of those kind of.
They're clearly trying to be Terminator, and it's like right after the Terminator.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one last thing before you go. I don't know how much you watch movies with your kids, and I think we've talked about this a little bit. Or if you've tried, kind of watching movies that you loved as a kid, with your kid. But I was reading a thing on Reddit of this guy who he has a son who's maybe like 12 or something like that. And he's introducing movies to him that he loved, but he's purposely not letting him watch the trailers for anything.
Oh.
So he showed him the original Terminator, which he loved. Then he showed him Terminator 2 without knowing that Arnold is a good guy in it. And it's not until, you kind of forget, but it's not until like a good ways into the movie that he's the hero rather than the villain. And the guy was just saying how his kid's mind was blown by that. And he did the same thing like with the Star Wars movies. Like he didn't know that Darth Vader is his father, and so he got to have that surprise.
That's
that
awesome
and everything. So yeah,
my daughter has a teacher at school who also works at a local, like little. One of those great old, it's in a strip mall, it's a 2-screen theater that you never see these things anymore, these places. It's independently owned, and it shows first run popcorn stuff. And she gets to take the kids to see movies every once in a while, every couple of months. They have like a movie day that they can go to. It's really cool. And this past Friday was Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Now, Nova, my daughter, has not ever seen any of the
other
Marvel. None. No MCU movies at all. It's just not really Nova's thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, she's going to go. If it's movie day, she's into it. She's going to go. And I was like, I am really interested to see what you think. Because, I've pretty much seen all of the MCU movies. I haven't actually at this point, but you get it. I'm kind of all in on it, and I collected the comics as a kid, as did you. So, and I had another thing I had to do. I ended up getting there. I watched about the last half an hour of it, and then on the ride home, she was asking me a bunch of questions, and we were talking about it. I'm like, we subscribe to Disney. I think we have all of there's like 15 years of movies. Like, you enjoyed that roller coaster ride. I got 2 other movies of these characters for you to watch, right? And then, depending how into that you are, there's like a banquet of... I love watching movies with Nova. I really enjoy spending that time together. So I'm kind of excited. I'm like, anytime you want to have like a, you and me movie night, we'll pop some popcorn and sit down on the couch in front of the big TV and... you pick. I've seen it. I'm some of them are better than others, but they're all roller coaster rides like this. They're all just this crazy theme park extravaganza of CGI and tear-jerking moments and funny moments. I think the MCU is successful because it's really effective as entertainment in that way.
Oh, sure.
I agree with certain critics. I think it is. It's all kind of the same song. And if that's the only thing in theaters, then I would like to see some variety. But for what it is,
they said like Ant-Man, I don't think did spectacularly, and they're saying this is opening softer. That it's still a ton of money, but maybe less money than the pre. So you kind of wonder if they're starting to wind down a little bit. It's got to
be fatigue, right? It's just got to be fatigue.
I would think so. Is she still? I was thinking about this today. Last thing, and then we can get off of here. Is she still playing Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh,
is she still into that?
Started a D&D club at school. In fact, I'm so proud of her. She started a club, and they play every day at lunch.
Because I'm pretty sure I have, or at my parents' house, some of my original manuals. Those original ones. Would she want those?
Oh yeah, please. I got rid of mine. I literally I already a few years before this became an interest of Nova's. I think Mom was clearing out the stuff, and she's like, "Do you want any of this?" I'm like, "No, I'm not that into it anymore." And I had all of the original ones, first edition, hardcover.
Yeah.
And I think she just donated them or something like that. So if you've still got them, I'll buy them from you. That would be amazing. I think she'd really dig it.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that today. I don't know if she'd be into the original one, because my parents never threw anything away.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they're probably in my closet in my old bedroom. So I'll look.
I would love to have those. Yes, please.
Yeah. Because I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna do anything with it.
Yeah, we went and saw the Dungeons and Dragons movie with Chris Pine. We went and saw that. It was fun. I thought it was really fun, and it was funny. Mm-hmm. And the other Dungeons and Dragons films have been sort of fizzles, forgettable. Yeah. And this was really playful. This one had a lot of humor in it. It's a big CGI thing, but man, can Chris Pine anchor a movie?
Yeah.
Right? And the way that Chris Pratt does in so many films. Yeah, he really, you need a charismatic center person, and he pulls it off with aplomb. And it was fun. I don't know if it's going to go down in the annals of history as one of the great films of all time, but we had a good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, so Chris,
for next time.
Yeah, for next time, Eve of Destruction, Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. That is our handle. We are on the socials. Like and subscribe. Send us a comment. Send us suggestions. What did you think of the Boondock Saints? Please don't tell us why we're idiots, right? We know we're idiots.
But if you genuinely love the Boondock Saints, if you want to tell us why.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
I'd definitely like to hear why people love it,
That would actually be really interesting. Because I'll be the first person to admit that I'm not always right.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, I would definitely say it's just not my thing,
Yeah.
you know.
Sure.
Especially now. Maybe when I was whatever we would have been, I don't know, how old were we in 1999? Maybe I would have been like, that was cool, you know.
37.
Yeah, 37. So,
86. So
86.
cool. We are at time. Why don't we say goodnight to our wonderful listeners? Thank you so much for joining us or watching us. And unless you have anything else to add,
I think that's it.
we will talk to you all next week.